Hi, I'm Kurt from Malta and I run the channel called Borscht 3D. By day, I am a pharmaceutical technologist and I work in a quality department of a local pharmaceutical company where we import and distribute medicines. I help run the quality department and that involves a lot of effort during the day. However, in my free time, I like to spend my time in my shop. I like to build stuff made out of various materials, whether it's wood, metal, plastic, or any other kind of material that I get my hands on. I really enjoy building stuff, whether it's out of wood, plastic, metal, or foam, or any other kind of material that I can get my hands on. So I don't refer to myself as a woodworker or as a metal worker per se, I refer to myself as a maker. I try to make lots of different stuffs, anything which is interesting, anything which is useful, anything which makes my life a bit easier, and sometimes just the occasional odd thing that I managed to come up with. I started off my maker journey building props. I bought a 3D printer, I started printing props, as well as designing and modeling them myself. I enjoy this process, but I do enjoy working with my hands more, so I enjoy the build rather than the design per se. I've never had any formal training in 3D modeling or 3D printing or any of this making stuff, to be honest, but it's always been a kind of learn as you go kind of experience, which is incredibly interesting to me. I really enjoy that kind of experience. I really enjoy learning by making, by doing, rather than sitting in a classroom being told what to do. Not that there's anything wrong with that, some people works for them, but it just doesn't work for me. So I really enjoy the time that I spend in the garage just tinkering about, trying stuff and failing, and most importantly learning from it. The last project that I made were two because I was doing them concurrently. One of them was the piano hanger, which is a video that I just uploaded. It was basically made out of a shelf that my girlfriend was going to throw away. And instead of throwing it away, I decided to convert it into a piano hanger, which is a very interesting piece of art, really. First of all, it can be very attractive to look at. Mine featured abstract art, which I came up with, so probably it's nothing to look at, but I really enjoyed making it anyway. But yeah, it's a flat piece of wooden paneling, really, cut in fingers. And then you'll have segments in it, where when you press the lower part of the fingers, they sort of pop out, and then you can hang stuff onto them, like coats, clothes, or hats, or whatever. It's an interesting piece because on its own, when it's not being used, it's a decorative piece. It's a very interesting piece, but it's also practical and functional. And I like merging the two aspects together. There's nothing wrong with something being purely decorative or purely functional, but when you merge both, I've got a bit of a soft spot for efficiency. So when a project comes around and it's like that, I just really enjoy myself. The other project which I was doing concurrently while working on the piano hanger was a pair of leather bracers. These are going to be featured soon on my channel, but I made them specifically because I really want to get into leatherworking. I call this year the year of leatherworking. I've been working very, very briefly with leather and I'm really enjoying it. I've got a lot more projects lined up. So yeah, leather is a very interesting material to work with. It gives you instant gratification every step of the way when you cut it, when you carve it, when you stamp it, when you slick the edges, when you stain it, and it just gives you a feeling of satisfaction all throughout the process. So yeah, the piano hanger and the leather bracers were the two projects that I've done most recently. I'm working on another one at the moment. I'm working on something else, but yeah, those were the two that I just finished. So, as I said, I have a lot of tools in my workshop. It's not a fully kitted out workshop by any means, but every month I try to sort of see what kind of tool I need, or at least what looks interesting to buy. Mostly I buy tools to learn how to use them, because I would have whatever I need is already on hand, like sanders, jigsaws, belt sanders, drill presses, that kind of thing. So I'm always on the lookout to get more tools so that I can learn how to use them. That being said, it's quite lucky that I'm a bit lazy and the tool shop is a couple of streets down and I sometimes don't feel like walking there, so at least I get to save some money that way. But yeah, for the most part I buy a lot of tools. If I had to choose my favorite one, it would be a very, very close contest, a very close call, I think. Probably it has to be my 3D printer. I make so many interesting stuff with that tool, from Dungeons and Dragons miniatures to props. So yeah, I mean, you can make anything you want or need with a 3D printer. Very, very little things that you can't do. It's a very versatile tool to have, and the only drawback to it is that if you want to be working at peak efficiency with it, you need to pair it with 3D modeling, which sort of goes with it. It's not necessary. You can find a lot of designs online, which you can download for free. But knowing how to model stuff and print it saves up time, makes it custom to your need, and it's just an all very interesting, well-rounded tool. A close second, if I had to be asked, would probably be my drill press. It's a very cheap drill press, about 60 or 70 euros from one of the cheaper shops. And at first I really hated it, and this is why I love it really, because when I got it, it wasn't working properly. The shaft was stalling while the motor was still running, but it didn't make any noise of stalling. So when I opened it, I discovered that the shaft was loose on the flywheel. So it just was a matter of tightening the grub screw, and it worked well ever since. I'm very happy with it, and it's probably my second most favorite tool. So yeah, those two, the 3D printer and the drill press. So I've built various projects before. One of my very first projects was a GoPro adapter for my tripod. I had a smaller tripod back then. About a year, 2 years ago, I was still working with my GoPro with all the fisheye effect and everything, but it's all I had on hand and it worked just fine at the time. But I didn't have an adapter for the tripod for it, so I made one myself. I designed it, I printed it, and it was one of the first things that I made. However, I realized that it was slightly shorter than the holder it was supposed to fit into, so I designed an extra bracket to go next to it and around it, and I attached some LEDs to it. And these are two of my first projects that I uploaded on this channel, and it was one of the first two projects sort of that made me take the leap to go and share my projects on YouTube. I started making stuff probably when I was very, very young in my grandfather's garage. He used to give me a couple pieces of wood, some nails and a hammer, and I used to hammer them together into a cross or a square or something and be proud of my work at the end of the day, even though it looked like absolute rubbish. But it always instilled in me this sort of want to make. My favorite toys growing up were always the building blocks, Legos, and the sort of put together kind of toys like Meccano and stuff like that. And I always mostly enjoyed the build rather than the play. Same goes for any other toy I had. I used to spend hours upon hours setting the scene, and then when I am finished, it's just I would get bored and never play with the toys themselves. Fast forward a few years, during my teenage and early adult years, I had to give up making, well, mostly because I was growing up, I had to focus on studies and on work, so sort of making took a bit of a backseat. However, that being said, I got into it recently, especially once I started working at university, when I started working in research with 3D printing, and it got me hooked again, and I bought a 3D printer, started making props, started making stuff again. I built a workbench that's right behind me at the moment. One of my most significant projects that I made. Not because it's any special, it's nothing special to look at really. It's a very simple construction, just 2x4s and plywood, but it marked a date for me. It was when I started considering the garage as a workshop rather than a space that I could sort of go and spend some time in. And once you have a workshop, at least once I had a workshop, I started getting really attached to it. I buy tools of every kind, even though I barely use half of them, but that's the thing. So yeah, that's usually what happens in my workshop. So one area that I would like to delve into would be welding and blacksmithing, particular emphasis on blacksmithing. I have an arc welder. It's still in the box. It's been in the box for a year and a half now, and just a couple of weeks back I also bought a welding helmet. It's up there, and again, I've never used it, of course, but it's something that I am looking forward to getting into. Blacksmithing in particular, I've always been fascinated by blacksmiths. Whenever I used to read a book about medieval times when I was a kid, I always used to imagine the blacksmith hammering at the anvil, working on a coal forge or something. So it's always been a lifelong dream for me to build a forge, get an anvil, and get into metalworking and blacksmithing. Unfortunately, at the moment I cannot get into it because I'm using my parents' garage and space is limited, and obviously I cannot have a forge, a coal forge, or at least a gas-fired forge here. But once I have a dedicated workshop, hopefully in the future, that's probably one of the very first projects that I'll do once I move to a new place. So I am incredibly awestruck by all the blacksmiths that I see on Instagram or YouTube. I follow them very, almost religiously. So yeah, I mean, building a forge, getting into blacksmithing, that would be a dream come true. And I think it would complement really well all the other skills that I learned, or that at least that I'm learning at the moment. Woodworking, leatherworking, they go together very well if you'd like to create some really, really neat stuff. I've got a few projects lined up. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been great telling you all about what I do on my channel, and I hope that you enjoy it. As always, I'm always active on social media, so feel free to get in touch, and I hope to see you around and hope to see all of your projects.